welcome everybody for those who are on the screen here on the Zoom, and also for those who are following on our social networks. I'm very happy to see you here. I'm very happy that you accepted our invitation, both as speakers and as listeners, to this discussion. I think it's a timely discussion, of course, as we are just a few hours after the US elections, and we have a result. So my name is Roman Lequinou. I'm the managing director of Eurocreative. And for those who don't know, Eurocreative is a French established think tank which is working for a few years, which has been working for a few years already on the strengthening of relations between France and Central Eastern Europe. And this is our great pleasure to energize this discussion on the perspectives from the Eastern flank when it comes to the next US presidency. I think it's a very important topic, and it's a topic that has been discussed in different European capitals over the past few years, over the past few months especially. And now we can see that it's a reality. Trump is back. Trump has won. He has won a number of swing states. He has also won the popular vote, and he will be the next president of the United States. So now we have a number of questions. We know that the discussions on the European Union in Brussels, in national capitals, everywhere are focusing basically on a few topics, important topics. Security, of course, and this is the main and the most important topic that we might discuss today and that we will collectively discuss in the next few months. It's about geoeconomics as well, and it's about international relations and the place of the US in the world in the coming months, in the coming years, in the coming decades. But is it really just a Trump problem? I think that many people, many experts have already talked about this, and they know that it's also a US trend, and that Trump is different. Yes, he has a more specific or particular behavior, or let's put it this way, a diplomatic style that is more difficult to manage, but it doesn't change much. What is at stake is the unity of the Europeans, and this is the topic, the general discussion that we will have today. So this is the way for us to talk about this. We are very happy to have different national perspectives today from Poland, from Ukraine, from Hungary, from North Macedonia, as well as from Romania. Unfortunately, our colleague from Finland had to cancel the last moment, but I'm sure that you can read a few of his perspectives on social media very soon. And today I have the great pleasure to welcome Svitlana Kovalchuk, Executive Director of Yalta European Strategy, Wojciech Przybylski, Editor-in-Chief of Visegrad Insight, Oana Popescu, very soon, physically here, the Director of Global Focus Center from Romania, Zoran Netchev, the Head of the Center for European Integration at the Institute of Democracy Societas Civilis in Skopje, and Peter Steper, Professor at the Ludovika Public University in Budapest. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for taking the time, especially if some of you didn't have a very long night. And let's start about what is going on. And maybe I would like to start with Wojciech. How does it look like from Poland? Opa. Yes.
Wojciech, you are muted.
Thank you. Now I'm not. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak and to join this session, one of many sessions that we're having right now these days. I mean, today especially, and I expect also in the future, because of the pivotal elections in the US, and there are many dimensions. But what I think is worth stressing, this is a different situation for Poland and for Europe overall from the first victory of Donald Trump back in the day, when it caught everyone by surprise, including the US, that such possibility of such presidency would be materializing. And in the current context, we see in Poland immediate reaction to the result from the side of the Polish foreign minister, the prime minister, and necessarily the president of Poland. We have a cohabitation situation of the cohabitation between the president and the government. The two branches most often disagree with each other on a number of policy issues, but in this domain, despite they've been fighting heavily. They've been also visiting Joe Biden together as prime minister and the president. And also there was a message of congratulations to Donald Trump, both from the government and the president office. And I think this is swift, timely, not very elaborated, but in a good tone, saying that we are there for both the alliance, what connects Poland as the most pro-American society also in the globe. We're Pew Research Center brings the results of attitudes from around the globe in which Poland is more pro-American than Americans themselves. So mind that, and it has not only to do with the security partnership and alliance with NATO, but also a number of convictions in the Polish society about what America is and what the American promise in the sphere of freedom and lifestyle is, and who we identify also to a certain extent in the culture, which is strange, of course, for many partners in Europe. At the same time, and I'll stop here, you could have read Donald Tusk tweet from just before elections, in which the basic reminder is that the geopolitical outsourcing in Europe is over. That's something I also wrote with Donald Tusk advisor Paweł Karbownik, today's Deputy Minister of Finance, a year ago. Europe needs to take itself seriously in investing both in its own defense, but at the same time in building a serious relationship on defense when it comes to US to secure options for continuous support of Ukraine in the current fight, because this fight is not just about one country, it's about the whole of Europe staying united in the longer term.
Absolutely, and thank you, Wojciech. I can tell you that the tweet of Donald Tusk has been very well received from France. It's a proof that from Paris, at least, we think that there is a alignment between Paris and Warsaw when it comes to European strategic autonomy. There is also a strategic alignment on European strategic autonomy with another country, which is Hungary. But the relations are a bit different, let's put it that way. Hungary is important, as we know, because these days there are two important meetings in Budapest. The country is holding the European presidency, and it is much discussed in Budapest, the US presidency and its outcomes, and a few people think that Orban might be one of the winners. Is it the case, Peter?
Thank you very much for inviting me. Yeah, you can say so, that generally feeling the Hungarian political leadership feels they are the winner. But let me start with a little bit of a different perspective. That's what I always talk to my students in the university classroom, that foreign policy and party politics these days are so intertwined that sometimes it's more like a boxing exhibition or a match of some kind. And I think it's really important to remind ourselves that generally speaking, well, if Kamala Harris wins, the Hungarian opposition would be very happy. If Trump wins, of course, Fidesz voters are happy. But why? They are happy because they believe that their party leader chose wisely when decided to endorse Trump just before 2016. It was a long time ago. And still, Orban continues to express support of the Republican Party. But it's not a boxing exhibition. Okay, so when it comes to foreign policy and when it comes to American-Hungarian bilateral relations, I think the picture is much more nuanced and much more complex. So, yeah, if you consider the election results in the US from the perspective of Hungarian party politics, Fidesz voters can express how happy they are, and rightly so. But if we zoom out a little bit from that perspective, and if we look at the picture, well, I 100% agree with Wojciech regarding how the Polish society perceives the United States. But I think in the case of Hungary, it's very different. And I mean that generally speaking, the Hungarian voters do not care about American politics just in every political campaign. I mean, these days, of course, they care for a day or two. Nonetheless, we know nothing. We know nothing about the important issues like what's going on in Pennsylvania with the mining workers and whatsoever, because we, let's be honest, do not care. And I think it's important because US elections is about the problems of the US and not the problems of Hungary, Poland, Ukraine, or Central Europe, generally speaking. And I think that's what we need to remind ourselves. So I think that the discussion here and the focus here is what to expect from Donald Trump. And I think we should expect policies which are good for the United States and not policies which are good for Central Europe and not policies which are good for Europe. Maybe, and if we are fortunate, those policies can overlap. And I deeply believe that in terms of security issues, in terms of primarily NATO and secondarily the war in Ukraine, are, if you are with your right mind and if you are rational, even if the political campaign phase was rather vocal and sometimes, full with comments, which I think you should not take seriously. At the end of the day, the US national interest is the same: to defend Europe. Of course, the means and manners and how to perceive the problems what we have on the table are different for Biden than Trump. But at the end of the day, I do not see fundamental changes when it comes to issues of NATO. But of course, we can discuss what do you mean by fundamental means, and it's up to discussion. But that's my general introduction about the situation of the election of Trump. Of course, in Hungary, we had a really unfortunate situation with Ambassador Pressman, I can say so. For those who are not familiar with the issues of embassy issues, American embassy activity in Budapest, I can tell you that the problem here was not just the general political world view of the Biden administration, but his personal choice to appoint Ambassador Pressman here in Budapest, who was working constantly on, criticizing Prime Minister Orbán and the government so harshly and vocally that I think he basically supported Fidesz by mobilizing voters with the constant critics. And of course, it's not so funny, because I think at this point, the Hungarian-American relations during Biden became what you can call a little bit toxic. And that's, I think, will be a little bit different with Trump. So again, I do not expect huge changes when it comes to Ukraine, NATO, and the major strategic issues and interests. But I definitely hope that a new ambassador here in Budapest will be a little bit more friendly, at least on the rhetorical level, when it comes to, diplomatic relations.
Thank you, Peter. Let's keep to a country that is nearby, and I will give the floor to Ana Popescu, who has joined us. You are the director of Global Focus, as I mentioned during the introduction, but I do it again as you're here. Thanks for being here. And Peter mentioned that the US policies will basically focus especially on policies which are good for the US. How is it seen from Bucharest? We know that Romania has Poland, as Wojciech explained also, is a country that is pretty much US oriented. We know that Romania needs also the US on the Black Sea. How do you see it in Bucharest? What are the comments, the perspectives?
Sorry. Hi, everyone, and thank you very much, Roma, for the question. I think, clearly there's been a consensus over the past few months not to panic and to try and rely very much on the fact that during the previous Trump mandate, things were not very bad for the region and for Romania. And traditionally, we've had good relations with the Republicans. They've tended to play a more geopolitical game, stay engaged in Central Eastern Europe, and so on and so forth. I'm afraid to some extent we're fooling ourselves because we're not living the same times anymore. And the Republican Party is not the same Republican Party that we used to know, and the world is not the same. So frankly speaking, I see three major points. The first and the foremost one is Ukraine. There's been so much talk. It's almost become a cliche about Trump and Putin potentially solving the conflict in Ukraine in 24 hours and so on and so forth. We're not going to have peace in 24 hours, but we might have a very strong temptation from a Trump presidency to play a game that's based very much on balance of power. What that means is that just as Trump sees the United States as being the undisputed leader, and it deserves a certain status just because of its importance in world affairs. I'm afraid he looks at Russia and he sees something similar, even if it's not on an equal footing. But still, I think Trump believes that if you're a big power, then you deserve a form of a concession from everybody else, and you have rights by default, and everybody needs to bow to that just because you are a great power. Whether that's on a regional level or global, economic, political, security, it doesn't really matter. And then on the other hand, I'm pretty sure he looks at the map of the region, looks at Ukraine, and again, sees pretty much what Putin sees, which is what is Ukraine anyway? An artificial state, as he probably considers a lot of our countries. No problem if we redraw borders that have been drawn and redrawn following the two world wars and the rest of history. And then we can finally get back to business because Trump's priority will still lie with China and the Indo-Pacific. So he actually wants to get the secondary front out of his way, and he just wants to get it done with so that he can focus on what he feels are the really important issues. No need to tell you that if that happens, that weakens very much the entire region. It signals to Russia that Trump is willing to enter into this power politics game. It creates vulnerabilities for NATO and non-NATO members around the Black Sea, and it really emboldens Russia to continue down this exact same path and provoke again and again. So this is the case with the resolution of the conflict in Ukraine, which might be done very unfairly to Kiev and at the expense of all of us. Secondly, I think again, given that the United States under Trump might really not mind this new trend in world politics, which is let's just throw away the global order that was based on liberal democratic values, principles, and rules. Let's just reinvent a new game, because Trump feels the United States has been at a disadvantage under the pre-existing order. So he's actually not that unhappy with the fact that the likes of China, Russia, Iran, and others are challenging it. And I think he also feels that he's somehow more endowed than others with the abilities to redraw the international system in a smarter, new way. And the thing is, in our region, increasingly we see autocratic governments that tend to engage not with permanent allies, but with anyone who's willing to pay or prop these governments to support their staying in power and the survival of the corrupt networks that underpin them. So what this creates is a sort of vacuum around the wider Black Sea region. I'm including here the Western Balkans, where where every country will promote its own interest at the expense of others through conflict, if need be, and the United States will find that quite natural. Last but not least, and I will close with that. On a more positive note, I don't think that Donald Trump will be inclined to do all these things compromising United States and Europe security beyond certain red lines. I'm just afraid that the red lines he's going to draw are much more flexible than we would like them to be. And I think notions like a gray area between Russia and NATO, a buffer zone, countries that are neither in nor out. They have a loose partnership with the EU and NATO, but they're not quite in. All of these are not notions that he finds in any way unacceptable. So probably there will still be a very strong military presence by the United States. The eastern flank will still be consolidated. Trump will still see high stakes in that, but he might actually believe that other things that we believe at this point are crucial to our security and stability are not that important after all. So I think that's pretty much where we are at this point, to the extent that we can make predictions about somebody who has been so unpredictable.
Thank you very much, Joanna. It was a great reminder also that we might have these different visions between the US and Europe. And I would like to continue in down south to North Macedonia and to Zoran. It has been mentioned that one of the risks would be a vacuum that would leave some autocrats or some elites to benefit from there. What is the situation in the Western Balkans, and especially what are the perspectives, Zoran, from Skopje?
Yeah, thank you, Romain. Yeah, I think that there a lot of political leaders in the Balkans are quite happy with Donald Trump coming back to power, because most of these guys understand the way he works and kind of aligns or complies with the way of dealing that most of our leaders have. So they actually came quite prepared, different to the first Trump term. They start preparing early. Couple of months ago, for example, Jared Kushner was around the region, so he already struck a couple of deals, two most prominent, one with Serbia and the other one with Albania, for mostly real estate. So it's kind of a business deal, there's a preparatory work for the eventual Trump coming to power. So they already started this kind of, transactionalism that existed, it existed before. And I think that they have learned the lessons from previously. Much of it, it's not, as we are kind of encapsulated, and, some of the countries are members of NATO, actually, three of them. One of them is the fourth one. Kosovo is mostly aligned with what US or NATO will actually say and do. There are two countries which are left, but also when you look at, besides playing this game, we are going to work also with the Russians and the Chinese, while still, looking at least nominally looking at the West, for example, with Belgrade. I think most of there will be no specific attention to the Balkans whatsoever. For the region, it will be business as usual. The American administration has lowered actually the whole kind of level of engagement with the Western Balkans, which is normal, having in mind what is going on, Ukraine, the kind of the situation with China and in situation in the Indo-Pacific. So not specific kind of interest in the region. Anyways, we are too small for any kind of more, let's say, robust engagement in the region in order to resolve some of the open issues. I think it will be similar to his administration engagement in Ukraine or towards Ukraine. We can draw similar lessons to the Balkans. The whole issue is how much problems or kind of challenges his administration will pose for the European Union itself. So how the EU actually and the countries from the region are actually looking at the EU and the whole kind of narrative around the EU in the region. So in regards to the states themselves, I don't think that there will be some specific issues or problems there. They will adapt to the new situation, which they most of them really understand. As Joanna mentioned, kind of autocratic governments, more, prone to transactionalism, although we have seen a lot of transactionalism also coming from the EU lately. We had, for example, Macron was twice in Belgrade, even regardless of the level of alignment of common foreign and security policy declarations when it comes to Serbia, which is below 50, or you look at more detailed, you will see that actually none of the positions that the EU has towards China and Russia, Serbia is aligned. But then, Vucic goes, buys Rafales, and then everything is okay. You don't need to be. So this transactionalism exists, and it is a reality. I think, with Trump in power, this will be only reinforced. The issue is how much problems his administration will make vis-a-vis the engagement of the European Union and European member states in this region. I think this is the main issue. I will stop there.
Thank you very much, Zoran. You mentioned transactionalism, and this is also a topic that we can discuss upon in the second part of this webinar. But to close the first part, I would like to ask Svetlana, what are the perspectives from Ukraine? Because as we know, Ukraine is one of the countries that has the most stakes in its relations today with the US. So I would like to ask you how the people are feeling about it, how the elite in Ukraine is reacting to the re-election of Donald Trump.
Thank you, Romain, for inviting me. Yes, the first questions everyone in Ukraine discussed this morning, what is going to happen next with Trump being re-elected, because as we all other speakers mentioned already, with Trump we have several problems, because very often he mentions that he will finish Ukraine's war, Russian war within 24 hours. At the same time, he pointed out that he will reduce military aid for Ukraine and so on. And he had also different expressions regarding President Putin, and not all the time relations between our president and President Trump were really the best one. But at the same time, we strongly believe in Ukrainian leadership, Ukrainian government, that as Trump is very unpredictable person, it also can be a big win, because in such way we can expect really on just peace with big consequences for Russia. It is what really we want. And Trump already mentioned about his approach, peace through strength. And we in Ukraine hope that this approach will be not theoretical one, but practical one, and it will be possible to get a real peace through strength with support of the United States of America, and also with the support of NATO, because for us it's vital. Of course, we all know that there were problems with with approval of providing military aid from Republicans Party, but still we hope that bipartisan support for Ukraine will continues, and our government, our members of parliament, our presidents are working on it. And as far as I know, there were a lot of conversation between both government, with senators, congressmen, and also with representative of Democrats and Republicans. Still, Republicans and Democrats, both parties matters for us, because bipartisan support they all the time had it, and we hope that we will have it. And what important is for us, it's of course support by President Trump victory plans presented by our President Zelensky in September. In September, President Zelensky had a meeting with President Trump and also with Vice President Kamala Harris. He presented this plan, and so it was discussed. And why it's important to allow us to have that discussion like today we had, because invitation for to NATO memberships matters. For us, it's like possibility to secure security for next days, months, years. Without it, we will be not able to secure it. And what happens in Ukraine matters for the whole world, for the East European region, but for the world itself, as we continue to repeat that we are fighting not only for ourselves, we are fighting for the whole democratic world. It's why it matters to get support from the whole world, from whole democratic world. Yeah. Also, part of that victory plans was creating support of creating real defense system in Ukraine with empowered frontline units, with long-range weapons capabilities, and of course with a real good air defense system within all Ukraine. And of course, strategic deterrence matters. And we all need to work and ensure that non-nuclear deterrence force to be stationed within our borders, because it will influence the whole world. And I will shortly mention only two other points. It's also economic potential, how our allies, our neighbors can really use the economic potential of Ukraine, because we have it and it's impossible. And it could be key for global economic stability and growth. And of course, our presidents discussed also how we can secure a role for Ukraine in Europe, as we hope war will be over and we have the best armed forces in the world. And of course, the best armed forces could be used for replacement of American forces in the world. So we in Ukraine hope to reach a peace and hope to have Americans and other allies on our side.
Thank you very much, Svetlana. It closes the first part of our webinar, where we focused on the national perspectives, and now we would like to use the 20-ish last minutes to focus on thematic, basically thematic approaches, thematic questions, and we will go back to the questions that I mentioned before, which is security, which is probably the most important topic that we can discuss now. Geoeconomics, also a very important topic that has been discussed in the European Union a lot recently. And finally, international relations consequences. And I would like to get back to you already, Svetlana, because you mentioned something very important, which I think has to start the discussion on security. And this is the possibility to have peace through strength. I think this is fundamental. You mentioned that Ukraine is expected, rightly so, adhesion, accession to NATO. How do you see it? How do you evaluate this possibility? And also, how do you see the evolution of NATO under Trump presidency in the eastern flank? We know that many countries are afraid that NATO could have problems, afraid that the US presence in the eastern flank could diminish. How do you see it?
Thank you, Roman. Yes, security is like a main issue for us and also for NATO and for the whole world. We know that Trump was also very skeptical regarding American participation in the NATO, and especially about spending of European countries to the NATO budget. And we hope in Ukraine that America will stay engaged with NATO, and for sure now President Trump will see a little bit different alliance as he saw during his first terms, as now 2/3 of allies spend at least 2% of their GDP for defense of the alliances. And it was a big issue how much European countries are spending on the NATO. So at least this issue, we hope, is already resolved, and America will continue to play a strong role within NATO. Regarding Ukraine participation in the alliances, as I told, membership in NATO, it's only one real possibility to secure security of Ukraine and to make sure that no other full-scale invasion will happen in, I don't know, 3 or 5 years, because now while we are all in Ukraine, a little bit concerned about possible peace, because it can be used for Russian for increasing their capabilities, and in several years they can be back. And only NATO membership can give us guarantees that it will not happen in several years. And we expect to get at least invitation to NATO membership, because it will be like guarantee for us and for security of Ukraine and for security for Eastern Europe, I believe.
Thank you. And now, Peter, I would like to bring you on the security on discussion on security, because I think that the discussion is also like in 2016. Let's be real, but without the same approach. Let's say in 2016, some Europeans at least, were saying that Trump is an opportunity for Europeans to develop European defense. Today, we hear the same thing, but with a more urgent need. Let's put it that way. Svitlana mentioned peace through strength. Do you think that European defense can be the answer of this?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think peace through strength is something which 100% describes what Trump was doing in the first presidency. So I really like the wording, because I just wanted to start with that. So what I really expect from the next Trump administration is, to tackle those issues, which are basically the same issues which were there for Joe Biden. First and foremost, from the US perspective, first and foremost, the rise of China and what to do with the Taiwan issue. And by the Taiwan issue, I not necessarily mean politically, but from the perspective of military. So let's face the fact, if you look at Republican think tanks and institutes making estimates if the US is capable of winning a war, in a naval war with China around the island of Taiwan, many would say they are not ready for that. And of course, Republican think tanks and their policy papers and advocacy activities are not necessarily influencing Trump's foreign policy directly, but of course, we can make a guess. So if they think the US should put more effort on building new naval capabilities, they're not just talking about the China issue here and the naval issue around Taiwan, but also if you look at the north, Russia even now has the upper hand when it comes to the North Pole with all the ice-breaking ship capabilities, which has been an issue during the Biden administration. And Trump and his supporters basically were constantly bashing Democrats to do more and build a more capable US army. So that's what I expected. That's one thing. Some American friends of mine would say they are pushing for not just this 3% of American GDP channeled through military development, but also increase it to 4, maybe to 5. Obviously, well, to be honest, in Hungary, if we reach the 2% or maybe a little bit more, we would be over the moon because we have very different economic realities than the United States. But when such a superpower talks about spending such a big amount of money on military capabilities, it really will be different than what we see before. Obviously, it's kind of risky for us to see that, because for us, essentially, US equals NATO. But the question arose, if they are ready to put more effort on their own military capabilities, why they would need such an obsolete form of cooperation. It's not my wording, it's the wording of certain GOP politicians. So for us, I think it's crucial to convince Donald Trump and the administration that NATO is not obsolete, and they need NATO because they know we need NATO. But if we can convince them that they also need that format for their own security interest, and we can be security providers who can provide further security for all of us, it would be the wise strategy. This is not just my personal opinion, but I'm fairly convinced that the recent Hungarian government, after they started the army modernization program in Hungary, are really convinced to do more when it comes to NATO, which is unprecedented, to be honest. In the history of Hungary, the very first decades, we unfortunately spent very little to our army capabilities, but it has changed. And at last but not least, well, I'm sorry to say that I would be the most happy person ever to see Biden's foreign policy striving. But if you look at the problems on the Middle East, if you look at the situation in Ukraine, and if you look at how they tackled China, I'm not really convinced if that was something of a success. And maybe Trump, rightfully so, was criticized by many that Jared Kushner and some very unorthodox people were responsible to make the actual Middle East policy. But what they actually were making with the Abraham Accords, even if they moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and it increased the tension, but while increasing the tension with some hasty and emotion-driven let's say, policies, in the same time, they were capable to maintain at least some kind of stability. And, well, I'm sorry to say that, but what I saw from the Biden administration in the past years was more like a chaos than anything close to stability. And of course, I cannot blame Biden for the attacks in Gaza and as a result of that, the Israeli retaliation and the war which is going on. But at least they should try to do more in order to bring back stability. Trump, well, the style is maybe harsh, which is strange for us, but at least the substance was very simple and clear for the players in the Middle Eastern region. If you are working with us by the rules of what somebody mentioned, transactionalism, so if you follow your economic interest, we can work together. And I really don't care if you are a friend or a foe. We can come up with a solution which is good for, let's say, stability, which is good for the American people. So I think that's the key to understand the security policy, what we can expect from the second Trump administration. And yeah, maybe I will pass the floor to the others to talk about geoeconomics and the other issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you made my transition much easier because you mentioned the topic of economics. And this is exactly the topic that we will discuss now with Wojciech. Unfortunately, Henry is not here because the idea was to talk also about the defense industry. It's a very important topic, but generally geoeconomics is one of the biggest concerns for Europeans today. We know and we talk a lot about competitiveness. There is the summit that is going on in Budapest in 2 days that will be devoted to this. There is the report from Draghi that has proposed some ideas and which is being discussed. Wojciech, you are from Poland. Poland will take over the presidency very soon of the European Union. Competitiveness will be one of the topic. How do you see this perspective? Is it going to be, it is a necessity, but is it going to be a clashing objective between the EU and the US of Donald Trump?
Thank you, Roman. And I think indeed this is really important because of the upcoming EU presidency. Poland is preparing to hold a number of discussions or topics that relate to the competitiveness and even more so geoeconomics. As you know, the priorities of Polish focus on the European affairs is lying around the axis of security. This is a national strategy of the party, in the governing party in Poland and the coalition overall, to put security and the question of security in all dimensions as the first unifying element of the strategy of the government after elections in October last year. And it is, by no surprise, also aligned with the now priorities of the Polish presidency, which will tackle security also in these dimensions of economic security, food security, civil security, where a number of these issues will be talked about. Priority, the main focus from the Polish perspective will lie in how are we going to fund defense. Poland has put in its own national budget even a bigger money on the table for funding defense for European security, which is closing to 5% GDP, which also at the same time, we have to say, is unsustainable, especially in the given financial model. Poland is also going to be under the excessive debt, be part of the excessive debt procedure because of the past year, of the past government decisions of also using some of these funds for defense and, let's say, generally speaking, mismanagement. And the Commission has initiated excessive debt procedure against Poland for spending on military aid. That puts the current government in even more difficult position and will emphasize the priority number one of finding money to actually pay for what is the dearest to us, which is peace. And that can be achieved only by achieving also effective defense posture by the countries of the EU. The main challenge here is how do we convince primarily the biggest and the most important economy, Germany, to modify or find an innovative, creative solution to be able to deliver on this objective. And we know that because also of the political situation in Germany, it is not the easiest, if not the hardest, simply it is the hardest task right now, and will not necessarily be the easiest in the upcoming cycle when the Germans have actually elections. Now, the second point on geoeconomics and the economic perspective, also during the Polish presidency, speaking of competitiveness, and there are many things that we need to improve, but from Central Eastern European point of view, we just need deeper and more effective single market, especially emphasizing open access to services for businesses from Central Europe on the European market. So Poland was never a big fan of the Posted Workers Directive for that matter. But the big, and again, keeping just single focus in this domain, emphasis will be on energy security. It's not that tariffs, any tensions between US and Europe will create or make our situation more precarious than it already is in economy. But what creates it is the lack of cheap and reliable energy source for industries in Europe, all across Europe, to be competitive and to draw and bring more investment, and therefore allow us to also fund defense, anything else. And this will be also a critical priority for, from the point of view of Poland, not just in the presidency, but overall, to find and to maintain ability to create businesses, investment, and draw investors to actually this big ambition of industrialization. There will be no industry without cheap energy, affordable energy, and that is to be found currently in very few places in Europe. And the place that we might have had hopes for, like Ukraine with nuclear power plants, is being currently undermined exactly in this area because of the military activity of Russia. So this is not also creating any quick fix, quick solution. I might add here that tariffs is just yet another element where Europe is now much better prepared to talk also with the US, because the achievement of the decisions that actually Poland supported together with France, Baltic countries, Italy, Denmark, Ireland, Spain, I think as well, not sure about Spain though, are the tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. The smart types of tariffs allow also Europe now to put something on the table when we're discussing with the US anything to be discussed about competitiveness in the context of China and unfair practices of China in access of European or US companies to their market, and leveling or making the playing field, economic playing field, equal. I believe there will be actually room for coordination and cooperation during the ECOFIN summit in April in Poland. There will be a special invitation for US Secretary of Treasury to discuss the policies on tariffs and geoeconomics, therefore, between Europe and the US. What will be the outcome? Is subject of, I believe, a separate discussion, but I could lay out at least the ideas for the priorities that we're going to be seeing during the next 6 months and overall during this government's term.
Thank you very much. Fantastic, Wojciech. And you gave me also an excellent transition to China, because this is the last topic I want to talk about. This is about international relations and what's the place for Europeans there. Middle East has been mentioned, and basically to say that the Europeans have little voice there. And this is also the case on China. And you mentioned these tariffs. You can see that a few countries took over the lead when it comes to tariffs on China. For specific and national interest also, but few countries have been against. And we remember maybe also the visit of Prime Minister Sanchez in Beijing just a few weeks before. We remember also that Germany is into the spotlight. We can talk about Hungary, Slovakia, and we know that a few other countries have been rather silent when it comes to China. We know that Trump will increase its pressure over European partners. There is this dimension of transactionalism. So my question to you, Anna, is the following. Can Europeans have a voice on China? Will they have to align on a hawkish perspective from the US? What's the situation?
I guess this will very much depend on the wider EU-US negotiation as to what the transatlantic relationship will look like. In principle, I would say there is going to be very hard pressure from the United States on Europe to disengage from so much dependence on China, from anything strategic, infrastructure, increase resilience of supply chains, and so on and so forth. It will be the defining conflict or competition of the coming decade, the US-China competition. So I'm really expecting Trump's US to step up pressure on its allies in every shape and form. It's actually very well integrated with the whole idea of building a more resilient Europe. And in all honesty, you cannot have a serious discussion on European strategic autonomy, defense, or call it what you wish, strengthening the security and stability of the continent by looking at Russia only just because it's our neighbor and not looking at the senior partner, which is China. So I think this will clearly be the context. Now, will that translate into immediate disengagement or, kind of reduction, serious reduction of ties with China and so on? That is not something that's economically possible for a lot of the European countries, Germany included. But it's a process. I mean, already, if you look at Germany, private companies are building more resilience vis-a-vis China than the German federal government is. So the dynamics is there, and the private sector feels the heat, and I'm pretty sure that apart from what's going to happen on a government to government level, there is going to be added pressure coming on the one hand from a private sector which might really not mind cheap prices from China, but they do know that a Trump-led US will be much more harsh and will have ways of twisting arms. So they will be gradually preparing for that and insulating from that kind of dependence and vulnerability. So that's on the one hand, and then on the other hand, we already see a trend of European companies relocating to the US because of better investment opportunities. It is not just for the EU member states and their governments that the transatlantic relationship is important, but how to navigate the propensity toward protectionism in America versus European companies also being upset with the lack of competitiveness and investment-friendly policies and climate in Europe, and looking to the US as a model, and so on and so forth. So all of these things, these will involve a certain kind of, taking stock of the global competition that's taking place between the US and China, trying to keep the best of both worlds, meaning try to preserve some of the cheaper supply chains from China, while at the same time not translating that into a vulnerability. So I think this will be a very complex endeavor. I'm quite sure Washington will condition some of its support for Europe, and I mean not just security, but in every other way, on how Europe treats China. So there will be some serious arm twisting from both sides. Europe is a little bit caught in the middle, and we are not in a very in a very comfortable position, precisely because we have not invested enough in due time in our own technological progress, economic resilience, and then so on and so forth. But maybe it helps push things forward. I do believe that this is a cold shower. Any way you look at it, this is a cold shower. Now we do have a tendency in Europe to react suddenly and positively, often to dramatic events on a global level. See the breakout of the war in Ukraine, for instance. But then very quickly, we look for ways to fall back on the previous inertia. So I think a lot will happen, a lot will depend on whether Trump will more aggressively push forward, and then Europe will have to keep up, or there will be room for maneuver, and then Europe will have a chance to cling to the inertia that we so much love, unfortunately. But this is really, this game is only beginning. Even though it's been unfolding for years, it feels like this is a new beginning, and we have yet to see which way this is going to go.
Thank you, Anna. The game is beginning and our discussion is ending. With a last question to Zoran. We've been talking a lot of transactionalism, so why not to finish on this? And we know that transactionalism is especially this reality that Trump administration was and will be different than other ones because the style is different. And transactionalism is at the heart of Trump behavior in diplomatic relations, including with the Europeans. What I would like to ask you, Zoran, is we know that it can encourage bilateralization of relations, which is a danger for the unity of Europeans. We know also that it can leave in certain areas, in certain countries, also possibilities for revisionism, because we know that Trump sometimes is pushing towards this direction. And my question is basically to know what will be the effect on Europeans, and do you think that there will be consequences on their relations between themselves? And here, maybe you want to add on enlargement. Maybe it can have some consequences on enlargement, or maybe not.
Yeah, it's always like when it comes to a shock therapy, then something good might come up, as a result of it. If it's going to be positive or not, yeah, that remains to be seen. But at least that something will come up, because what we have seen for decades already, that problems continue to or let's say call this the bilateral issues continue to be nurtured, and there are no final solutions on the main issue that can drive the process forward. And there has been attempts before, as you know, there was an attempt, and both Serbia and Kosovo were in DC to sign these like separate agreements, which was negotiated by Grenell, which is somehow again one of the names that are being discussed as the potential candidates for the State Department. Hopefully not, but that if he becomes, then he knows his deals around the region. That wasn't really successful. The point is how much that has damaged the relations between the two. When it comes to the other issues, if it is possible to incline to some kind of revisionism, if there is, let's say, if there is sufficient space to do so, at least for the biggest one in the region and the influence it has also on other countries, I think at least there will be an attempt. There are attempts under the current framework. You can imagine what will happen if there is a much broader space provided by Trump's administration. If that will be successful or not, it's difficult. Most probably not. But at least I think that there will be an attempt. The whole issue is that if something like that happens, if there is a kind of like shock, maybe that will trigger some kind of a more robust, let's say, intervention by the EU. That finally, things need to be closed, and we need to close this region as a gray zone, and finalize this process of enlargement. Hopefully, I don't know if that will happen, having in mind the previous experience, not only with the region, but you can also look at Ukraine, you can look at Moldova. So let's see what will happen. The bigger picture is actually how the EU, and this is especially what is the influence of actually this whole Trump administration will have on the economies in the EU, especially two countries which are extremely relevant for the Western Balkans. One is Germany, because the biggest by far trade from the region, from all of the six, goes to Germany. You can take North Macedonia an example. 50% plus of the exports goes to Germany in car parts. So that might change, and had like really huge influence on the economies. And when they're struggling, of course, there are other attempts to change the existing scenario. The other one is actually Hungary. But Hungary, as well as Germany, as well as Serbia, they try to play, best of the both worlds, what Oana mentioned, and her cat around her. But the whole point is that, you have the big four German companies being present in Hungary, which is important for the Western Balkan markets. On the other side, you have huge investments in battery production uh, by the Chinese in Hungary. And you have an announcement, or, the possibility to have one of the largest, like lithium mines in Serbia. All of that is related to cars and batteries. So the more important thing is on how this can be influenced, is mostly how the Hungary and Germany will be placed in this kind of game, and what kind of effect that will have on the region itself.
Thank you very much for this concrete example, Zoran. The discussion comes to an end, and I think that the motto can be, not of our discussion, of course, but generally enough of the talks and time to act, but it's been already a long time that Europeans should act and should do more, help Ukraine to win over Russia, help enlargement to happen, help basically Europeans to be more secure, more prosperous, and hopefully more democratic. So there's a lot of things to do. Hopefully we can contribute from our position. So let's keep in touch. I would like to thank very much all the speakers that took time and took interest in the organization of this webinar and sharing the perspective from the national capitals and the regions. I think that it's very important for everyone to know a bit more what us Europeans think about it. And thanks for the audience, both on the Zoom and from the social network. The rediffusion of this webinar will be available today or tomorrow. So thanks a lot, and see you next time.